Hi, friends. Welcome back to the Anástasis Center channel. I'm Mako Nagasawa, the director, and we are finishing up our theology of Tolkien's Lord of the Rings. We've covered a lot of ground in this series. First, we talked about Tolkien and his three purposes for writing. Number one is to write a story that contains the languages that he was inventing and in some ways piecing back together. Number two, to write a myth for England. And number three, to explore a little bit of what that myth, the story that existed prior to Beowulf, prior to other English literature that we know of, what it might have been like and why it might have led to the English, the Angles, coming to Christian faith so relatively quickly. Secondly, we talked about God, the portrayal of God in Tolkien's Legendarium. How can this God be good? How can this God create a world in which evil is possible and that evil exists? And what is that God doing to defeat evil without becoming evil himself? Thirdly, we talked about the role of humanity and the identity of humanity, that humans have a special vocation in this world to partner with God. Fourth, we talked about salvation and the defeat of evil reflected in the hero's journey. And then fifth and sixth, for the past two sessions, we've been talking about ethics and epistemology. What is the right thing to do? And how do we know? How do we know what the right thing to do is? For our last session, at least for now, and maybe we'll do some special sessions on Tolkien another time, but in this series, the last topic is virtue ethics. Virtue ethics is a form of ethics that emphasizes character growth and character development. It's different from morality in the sense that maybe most Western thinkers are accustomed to thinking about it, kind of legalistically, or do this, do that. Virtue ethics is focused on character development. When we say the phrase, something has become second nature, or you've practiced it, it's become a habit and it's become a characteristic of you, we're referring to virtue ethics. In Greek thought, there were virtue ethics of prudence and justice and patience and courage. And Aristotle, for example, believed that you needed to cultivate these virtues in order to participate meaningfully in community, in what Aristotle called the polis, the city, because we are political animals, not in a bad way necessarily, but because we're communal, we're relational, we were designed to live in community, and yet we need to grow in virtue in order to do that well. Tolkien was concerned with what he called northernness, and these were virtue ethics expressed by the Norse people or the Germanic and Anglo-Saxon people. What were those? Well, they were virtues expressed in their stories and in their mythology. In Norse mythology, there was the understanding that the gods were going to fight the giants and lose. In Anglo-Saxon literature, there's the story of Beowulf, who has to fight Grendel, Grendel's mother, and eventually the dragon, and lose his life doing it. The lessons here are lessons about good and evil. So we've all heard the phrase, might does not make right. Well, the point of northernness and the sense of courage that the Norse and Anglo-Saxon people demonstrated was to also invert that and say, well, yes, but right does not make might. In other words, the reason why in these stories, the good characters, or the characters on the side of good, fight despite knowing that they're going to lose is because right does not make might. It's not just that, well, if you decide that you're going to be on the good side, that you're going to win. And that is a very challenging posture to take. So not only is it true that might does not make right, but right does not make might. And so you might ask, well, then why do we fight? Why do we, or why even be on the side of the right? Why be good? Why be on the side of virtue? Simply because it is good. I mean, the stories and the myths challenge its tellers and its audience to really give their lives courageously for what is good, even though you might lose, even though you know you will lose. And we'll look at Eowyn especially, because she's such a great example of this northern courage. But of course, Tolkien was a Christian writer, and so he believed that there were Christian virtues of faith, hope, and love that filled these earlier stories to the full. That the Christian virtues, the Christian sense of virtue, honored the best of pagan myths and stories and pagan virtue, but gave them a different ground, kind of put them in a different framework, in a different container, in a different story, and by doing that, actually fulfilled them. So I'm going to take these three virtues, faith, hope, and love, in reverse order. We're going to talk about love, and then hope, and finally faith. What do these look like in Tolkien? What does it look like to grow in these virtues? One of my favorite examples is when Pippin is reunited with Merry in Gondor in the Houses of Healing. And the two of them reflect on how they got into this adventure in the first place. And here is a picture from the movie of Aragorn healing others in the Houses of Healing. I think he's healing Eowyn and Faramir. And Merry is also there because he's stabbed the Witch King of Angmar, and his hand needs healing because of that. And Pippin and Merry are reunited, and they are reflecting with wonder and love for Aragorn because they have gotten to know him, and they've gotten to see this side of him, his character, his healing power, his courage. And Pippin says, "Was there ever anyone like him?" Pippin said, "Except Gandalf, of course. I think they must be related." And Merry steps back, and he gives a window of insight into how they jumped into this story and what it means for them to know and love Aragorn and Gandalf and all of these noble characters that they've come to meet. But at least Pippin, we can now see them and honor them. It is best to love first what you're fitted to love, I suppose. You must start somewhere and have some roots, and the soil of the Shire is deep. Still, there are things deeper and higher, and not a gaffer could tend his garden in what he calls peace, but for them, whether he knows about them or not. I'm glad that we know about them a little. And he's talking about the Rangers and the Grey Company, the Dunedain, who protected the Shire, even though very few hobbits knew that. I'm glad that we know about them a little, but I don't know why I'm talking like this. Where's that leaf? And get my pipe out of my pack if it isn't broken. It's just such comedy. What The Lord of the Rings is doing is showing how characters like Merry and Pippin move from a sense of loyalty to a broader sense of love, and even a self-sacrificial love. So they start off with a love for the Shire, and Merry says, that's actually really good. It's, the Shire's beautiful. The soil of the Shire is deep. It's fertile. There's beauty there. You have to start somewhere and have some roots. And so even if you just love yourself, you love your family, you love your neighborhood, you love your community, you have to start somewhere. And yet love has to grow. It does. It has to grow because it's just realistic. We are connected. People are dependent on other people. Communities are dependent on other communities. You can't only be concerned about the Shire. You have to care eventually about all of Middle-earth. And that's how they got swept up into this adventure where they're now concerned about the future of Middle-earth entirely, because Sauron will not only destroy the Shire, but other peoples as well, people that they have come to know and to love. And so their sense of love has expanded, and not just them. So I made this imperfect list of those who grew in love over the course of The Lord of the Rings. So first, there's Gandalf. Gandalf studied hobbits, and he came to love them. He came to really enjoy them, enjoy bringing fireworks to their village, watching them laugh, drinking with them, smoking pipeweed with them. That's in contrast with Saruman, who only manipulated hobbits. Bilbo grew in love for the elves. Right? We saw that in The Hobbit. That is part of why he could give up the ring. He wanted to leave the Shire and go to Rivendell and be among the elves again. He was just so in awe and in wonder of them. We see this in minor characters who do really heroic things, just kind of off camera. So Fatty Bulger is a hobbit who stands in for Frodo, like he lives at Bag End for a few days, just so people don't ask a lot of questions. And he tells people like, well, Frodo's just gone off over there and he'll be back, and I'm just sweeping up. And he was there when the Nazgul came. He goes out the back door, but he still helps. Then there's Farmer Maggot, who helps Frodo and company escape. Frodo takes up the ring for the Shire, and not just the Shire, but also the peoples of Middle-earth. Boromir, even though he tries to get the ring, he winds up sacrificing his own life for Merry and Pippin. There's Legolas and Gimli, an elf and a dwarf, who, they didn't start off on a great footing. Lots of distrust. As I mentioned before in an earlier session, Legolas's father had imprisoned Gimli's father. These two were not going to easily become friends. And yet they do. They grow in friendship. They grow in trust and admiration and in their humor. So they grow in love for one another. And in the end, Legolas goes into the glittering caves with Gimli because, Gimli had wanted to show him, and Gimli comes out beaming, and Legolas is just stunned silent. He has no words. He's gonna say, he says, I don't know how to describe what I just saw. It was so beautiful. And in the end, Gimli sails with Legolas into the Undying Lands, where they could see Galadriel again. And so their friendship brings a measure of hope and healing to the relationship between elves and dwarves. We see Aragorn grow in love because he rescues Merry and Pippin on that fateful choice that he makes after Amon Hen. The orcs had taken Merry and Pippin captive, but also Frodo and Sam had escaped. And Aragorn eventually wants to go to Minas Tirith and fight there and be with the noble defenders of Minas Tirith and his kin, because he knows that they're going to be under attack by Sauron. But he has come to love Merry and Pippin. And so he and Legolas and Gimli go chasing them. They run for like days, 45 leagues. Eomer's like, what? You ran for that long? It's like an ultra marathon a day. So Aragorn grows in love. You have Frodo and Sam learning how to pity Gollum, and pity is a form of love. You have Arwen becoming mortal in order to marry Aragorn. And then you have Elrond, Arwen's father, blessing Arwen to marry Aragorn, even though it's just a crushing defeat. I can't imagine what was the conversation like between Elrond and Celebrian, his wife, who's already in Valinor, when Elrond sails west and says, well, our daughter stayed behind and now she's mortal. It's like, you did what? How could you let her do that? But Elrond grows in love for Aragorn as an adopted son and the men of Middle-earth. And so he blesses Arwen to marry him. For those of you who are also fans of the Silmarillion, you know that those who grow in love actually wind up being this thread, like a bright thread of resisting Melkor, so resisting evil. And this is really, really beautiful and powerful, because there's a lot of people who resist Melkor. I mean, he is evil embodied. He's the original Satan figure. So, of course, everyone, or a lot of people, are resisting him, but they blunder around, or they trip over their own feet, or their efforts are futile, or they get defeated, except for those who grow in love. Somehow this thread of characters, even if it costs them their lives, contribute to a victory over Melkor. So here's that thread. So you can start with Melian the Maya, loving and marrying the elf king Thingol. So she restricts herself to an incarnate form. She protects the realm of Thingol and becomes his queen. And then you have Finrod Felagund teaching the men of the house of Beor, because he's the first elf to really meet men, and he feels a bond with them. He feels a kinship. He pities them. He wants them to know the stories that the elves want to pass down. Barahir, who is one of those men who loves Finrod as a mentor and serves Finrod. And then Barahir's son, Beren, loves Luthien, who is the daughter of Melian and Thingol. And at first, Thingol is not excited to bless his daughter to marry this mortal guy. And so he throws out this challenge: get me a Silmaril from Morgoth's crown. When you have one in your hand, that's when I will give my daughter and bless her to marry you. And so Beren, out of love for Luthien, accepts the challenge. Then Finrod Felagund gives his life for Beren to fulfill his vow. Huon the Hound, also loving Luthien, helps their quest. Huon's one of my favorite characters too. Luthien not only sings Morgoth to sleep so that Beren could steal a Silmaril from his crown, then, after Beren dies, Luthien sings a song of love and sorrow and sways Mandos to grant them another shot at a mortal life, which then and they have one child to pass down the Silmaril to him. And this is a glimpse of the possibility of life after the judgment of Mandos for humans. Like, we don't really know. Is that possible? Maybe, right? Look at Luthien and Beren. Eventually, their descendant Eowyn, who marries Eärendil, sails to Valinor with the Silmaril to plead for forgiveness and help from the Valar, and then help comes. So notice, to the extent that evil can be resisted and challenged, it is through love. And many of these characters grow in love. Now, we might ask, well, how costly does that love have to be? I mean, we have to give up our lives? Well, maybe, right? I mean, look at the Ents. So they are one of the greatest examples of those who grew in love and suffered because of it, and yet they are so heroic. So there's a passage where Merry and Pippin are with them, and Treebeard decides this could be the last march of the Ents as they go to battle with Saruman. They know they have to stop him. And Treebeard describes first how the Ents came to this decision and what the consequences then of that are, or that might be. Treebeard marched on, singing with the others for a while, but after a time, his voice died to a murmur and fell silent again. Pippin could see that his old brow was wrinkled and knotted. At last, he looked up, and Pippin could see a sad look in his eyes. Sad, but not unhappy. There was a light in them, as if the green flame had sunk deeper into the dark wells of his thought. And then Treebeard says, "Of course, it is likely enough, my friends," he said slowly, "likely enough that we are going to our doom, the last march of the Ents. But if we stayed at home and did nothing, doom would find us anyway, sooner or later. That thought has long been growing in our hearts, and that is why we are marching now. It was not a hasty resolve." And there's some humor there, because, of course, the Ents do nothing in a hasty way. But it's also really powerful when you compare it with other characters who wanted to make hasty choices because they were riding on leading other people through fear or anger or some other imperfect emotion. And so who is like that? Well, Morgoth wanted to sway other people's minds among the Valar and the Maiar. Sauron wanted to control other people's minds. And then Feanor also wanted to control minds with his speech. You look at how the Ents made the decision to go on what could have been their last march. It was not a hasty resolve. They met in council. They waited. It took a long time. It was a tense, not just a moment, right? It was a tense, long moment, because how long are they going to take? But as the truth settles in each of them, that yes, this could be our last march. And not even that, because the Entwives are not coming back. We have become too different. And so they know they have to do something. And so now at last the march of the Ents may be worth a song. Aye, he sighed, we may help the other peoples before we pass away. Still, I should have liked to see the songs come true about the Entwives. I should dearly have liked to see Fimbrethel again. That was his wife. But there, my friends, songs, like trees, bear fruit only in their own time and their own way. And sometimes they are withered untimely. That is sad and tragic, and yet he is holding out some kind of hope, it seems, that the songs might come true of the Ents and the Entwives reuniting when Arda is remade, in Arda healed, because they know that their journey is going to be filled with sorrow one way or the other. They are going to do something to help the other peoples before they pass away. That is so powerful. They have grown in love for not only the trees, but the other peoples of Middle-earth. And remember, this is Treebeard who said, no one is on my side. Right? So he's aware that the elves, the humans, the dwarves, they have not been perfect, like partners on Middle-earth. And yet they will do what they can to help them. So here are some questions for, a little reflection and discussion. Why does growing in love resonate with us? I mean, I think hopefully it is everyone's experience. Hopefully everyone begins their life loved by someone, or knowing a taste of love from someone, and being able to love. And yet we need to grow in love. And sometimes that comes with its own challenges. Growing in love is not easy. Growing from loyalty to people who are loyal to you to becoming aware and sensitive about other people, and eventually being able to give self-sacrificially to others, even others that you don't totally understand or agree with. That is a mark of love. And so why is it that we deem self-sacrificial love as heroic? This is one of the themes that Lord of the Rings is dealing with, showing how people grow in love. One question that we have to ask is, could this, and by this I mean perhaps our enjoyment of the Lord of the Rings or Tolkien's Legendarium, but also could this pattern, this experience of growing in love, which again, hopefully we've all experienced to some degree, could this experience be preparing us for Jesus's love, both to perceive it and to receive it, and then to actively participate in it? Why is it challenging to look at Jesus's love? Because Jesus' love, in the way he defines what love is, and also the scope of that love, that it is for all humans, even all creation in its appropriate way, is it stretches us. It continues to stretch us. Jesus in Matthew 5, for example, it says, you have heard that it was said, you shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I say to you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, so that you may be children of your Father in heaven. For he makes his sun rise on the evil and on the good. So the sun rises on everybody. And the Father sends rain on the righteous and the unrighteous. So it's indiscriminate, right? Like there's so much goodness in the creation, and good that God intends for people. It abounds to all. And then Jesus says, well, this is what it's like to be like God, be more and more like God. Because if you stay only in the paradigm that love means loyalty to those who are loyal to you, well, that's really, really small. And actually the small then, and the inferior becomes the opponent of the bigger and the greater. And later Jesus says, for if you love those who love you, what reward do you have? Do not even the tax collectors do the same? And if you greet only your brothers and sisters, what more are you doing than others? Do not even the Gentiles do the same? In other words, Jesus says, look, everyone loves like that. Everyone can recognize reciprocity. You know, there's a saying, don't bite the hand that feeds you. We can all be good to people who are good to us. The issue is then, well, where does that leave us? It leaves us tribal. It leaves us only loyal to people who are loyal to us. But God loves all. And Jesus is calling us to participate in love that is prepared to sacrifice for others, even when they blow it for us, even when they're strangers to us. He says, be perfect, therefore, as your heavenly Father is perfect. Why is this a virtue? Why is growing in love a virtue like this? Well, ultimately, because Jesus is realistic. And so in The Lord of the Rings, The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings, we see people growing in love. The characters themselves are being prepared for something greater. And I would say that this is a story that is meant to benefit us in the same way. Another theme is moving from pagan courage to pre-Christian hope. And again, when I use the term pagan, it is not to be disparaging. It's saying this is a pre-Christian culture and way of thinking, and especially the culture of northernness, the Norse and Anglo-Saxon sense of courage, even in the face of defeat, is admirable. It is pointing towards a hope that this defeat will actually contribute to a larger victory. And in that sense, it is a pre-Christian hope. The person who best exemplifies this is Eowyn, Lady of Rohan. So when in the Two Towers, Aragorn, Gimli, Legolas, and Gandalf arrive in Rohan, Aragorn has this conversation with Eowyn. And Eowyn explains why it is that she doesn't want to be left behind, doesn't want to be left out of the battles. She wants to go fight. She says, I am weary of skulking in the hills and wish to face peril and battle. I am of the house of Eorl and not a serving woman. I can ride and wield blade, and I do not fear either pain or death. What do you fear, lady? Aragorn asked. A cage, she said, to stay behind bars until use and old age accept them, and all chance of doing great deeds is gone beyond recall or desire. Eowyn typifies the northernness, this sense of courage that I want to fight because that's the only way to achieve immortality, to do great deeds in battle. In fact, there's a way that Eowyn's courage goes even beyond Theoden's, because Theoden had been influenced and maybe a little drugged and mind controlled by Grima and Saruman to not be courageous, to not take stands, because Saruman just wanted to nullify Theoden. Eowyn saw this happening and felt powerless to do anything about it. And now that Theoden is healed, she feels powerless to go out to battle. Theoden had asked her to stay behind and lead the people. She said, I don't want to do this. I want to be in battle. I want to go to battle and do these deeds of renown. So Matthew Dickerson, in his book Finding Gandalf, says, like her uncle Theoden, Eowyn also needs to find healing, but it is a different type of healing. While her uncle is so afraid of death that he has become shameful, she is so afraid of shame that she seeks death. That is such an important insight here. It is not because Eowyn thinks there is hope of victory. It's actually, she thinks that battle is the only way to be seen. She seeks death because that's the only way of winning renown or demonstrating your virtue and being known. So the really interesting thing about Eowyn's character arc is how much she's able to meet her uncle King Theoden and even grow to a different place. Now in Return of the King, she is able to slay the Witch King of Angmar, and so she actually does go to battle. She does so under the name of Durnhelm. She masquerades as a male soldier, and carries Merry into battle, is able to they're able to slay the Witch King together, but she's deeply wounded. Her shield arm is broken, and she has to go to the houses of healing in Gondor. So it's there that she meets Faramir. And this is just one of the most touching and really charming relationships that we see. Here, Eowyn gets to know Faramir, and she develops feelings for him because he's also recovering and recuperating from the battle in the houses of healing. Faramir confesses his feelings for her, and then they have just this very frank conversation. Faramir knows that Eowyn loved Aragorn and wanted to be with Aragorn, and he acknowledges that. But he also sees something deeper in Eowyn about why she loved Aragorn. So as they have this conversation, Eowyn says, "But I desire no man's pity. Like, I don't want pity from you." "That I know," Faramir said. "You desired to have the love of the Lord Aragorn, because he was high and puissant, and you wished to have renown and glory and to be lifted far above the mean things that crawl on the earth. And as a great captain may to a young soldier, he seemed to you admirable. For so he is, a lord among men, the greatest that now is. But when he gave you only understanding and pity, then you desired to have nothing unless a brave death in battle. Look at me, Eowyn." And Eowyn looked at Faramir long and steadily, and Faramir said, "Do not scorn pity. That is the gift of a gentle heart, Eowyn. But I do not offer you my pity, for you are a lady high and valiant, and have yourself won renown that shall not be forgotten. And you are a lady beautiful, I deem, beyond even the words of the elven tongue to tell. And I love you. Once I pitied your sorrow, but now were you sorrowless, without fear or any lack, were you the blissful queen of Gondor. Still, I would love you. Eowyn, do you not love me?" Faramir here is saying, I pitied your sorrow. You lost your uncle, King Theoden. You expected to die in battle. You still want to go out and fight. So yes, I pitied your sorrow, but I see your heroic qualities, your courage. You have won renown on your own. And it is for these qualities and more that I love you. Eowyn, do you not love me? Then the heart of Eowyn changed, or else at last she understood it. And suddenly her winter passed, and the sun shone on her. So Eowyn understands that, yes, Faramir has observed correctly, and she had begun to doubt herself. Why had she loved Aragorn and wanted to be with him? Well, it is because she scorned other responsibilities like staying behind and leading her people. She only saw glory in battle as the way to go. And that was connected to her desire to fight alongside Aragorn and be with him. Now that she is open to more, open to other kinds, other forms of courage, she is open to other ways of living virtuously, living with courage, living with love. And so this passage is a really beautiful one. I know that there's, some readers and critics who criticize Tolkien for making Eowyn out to be less of a warrior and more of a domestic person, as if, that's what women ought to do. That's actually not what's happening here. Eowyn is embodying the best of pagan courage. And what Tolkien is doing is showing that courage really needs to open up further in order to be not just violent, not just concerned about battle, but concerned about other things, a whole range of other things. Eowyn says, "I stand in Minas Anor, the tower of the sun," she said, "and behold, the shadow has departed, because they've seen Sauron be defeated from their high place in the city." So, she says, this is Minas Anor again, the tower of the sun, the shadow is gone. "I will be a shield maiden no longer, nor vie with the great riders, nor take joy only in the songs of slaying. See, notice there, like it's not that she doesn't see the, like, oh, battles, some battles are important still, or that, songs of slaying the enemy, like they still have a place, right? So Eowyn is not giving up on those things internally. She's not dismissing them. She says, I'm not taking joy only in the songs of slaying. I will be a healer and love all things that grow and are not barren. And again, she looked at Faramir. No longer do I desire to be a queen, she said. So here, I mean, she's saying, I needed to see, I need to not depend on having an enemy. I need to not depend on going out to battle. There is something about courage that can be expressed in different ways. And in fact, no longer do I desire to be a queen, she said. Then Faramir laughed merrily. That is well, he said, for I am not a king. Yet I will wed with the White Lady of Rohan, if it be her will. And if she will, then let us cross the river, and in happier days let us dwell in fair Ithilien, and there make a garden. All things will grow with joy there, if the White Lady comes. Then must I leave my own people, man of Gondor? She said. And would you have your proud folk say of you, there goes a lord who tamed a wild shield maiden of the north. Was there no woman of the race of Numenor to choose? Oh, I would, said Faramir. And he took her in his arms and kissed her under the sunlit sky. And he cared not that they stood high upon the walls in the sight of many. And many indeed saw them, and the light that shone about them as they came down from the walls and went hand in hand to the houses of healing. That dialogue and that moment is so moving, because it shows that Eowyn and Faramir are growing together into a union of wisdom and vocation. This is what allows her to be with him. Eowyn says, I will be a healer and love all things that grow and are not barren. That sounds a lot like Samwise Gamgee, who wanted just to be a gardener, who wanted to tend a beautiful garden. And we know how much Tolkien loved gardens. So Eowyn has moved and grown to this point where there's courage in healing and gardening. Not everything depends on battle. Remember what Faramir had said. I do not love the bright sword for its sharpness, nor the arrow for its swiftness, nor the warrior for his glory. I love only that which they defend, the city of the men of Numenor. And I would have her loved for her memory, her ancientry, her beauty, and her present wisdom, not feared, save as men may fear the dignity of a man old and wise. So this represents just a union of courage with hope and goodness. What kind of hope? Well, that a hope that there is a virtue outside of battle that is higher still than virtue within it. Yes, of course, there is the virtue of standing up to an enemy. But why? It's because there's something to be defended. And there's virtues of courage and hope that are involved in gardening, caring for life. There is hope that life will endure in gardens before battlefields and separate from battlefields. And hope that life and love can exist independently of death and evil. So what makes life and love so precious and meaningful is not because death and evil are there to threaten it. It's not that we need to live in a world of dualism like that. I think one of the questions that Tolkien is putting before us is this story preparing us for life and love that can exist independent of death and evil? Because that is what it means to move from a pagan sense of courage and the best kind of courage, the kind of courage that says, I will fight for the good no matter what, even if I don't win. Yes, that is courage. But how much better is it to live in a story where you don't need to fight that way? And when you do, you have hope that life and love are virtuous in themselves. That it's not violence that makes life worthy. It's not violence that makes love lovable. These things are good in themselves. And there may be even something eucatastrophic about what God will do to vindicate that hope, to deliver on it. And here is where we get into something that is really moving, and that is the love and learning between elves and men. We see, hints of this dynamic in the love stories, right, between Arwen and Aragorn, and Luthien and Beren. But it is a deeper dynamic. It has to do with friendship and how these two peoples look at each other and wonder and ask questions. So for the elves, who are functionally immortal, I mean, they're bound to Arda, but they also observe with their long lives that Arda is diminishing, it's fading, the power is going out of it, the beauty is going out of it even. And so the elves are bound to this world, but they are questioning that. Why are we bound to this world? Why do we experience weariness? And Galadriel makes the statement that as long as they linger in Middle Earth, they will fade. They're fading to forget and be forgotten. On the other hand, there are, the men, the humans, the mortal people who ask, why do we die? Why must we leave this world? That leads people to feel despair, to feel jealous of the elves, like the Númenóreans felt jealous of the elves and the Valar as they looked to the west and said, how come we can't go there? How come we have to die, even though we live really long and things like that? And so they started to say, why is death called the gift of Ilúvatar? It's no gift, it's a curse. So there is a story in the book Morgoth's Ring called the Athrobeth, or the debate between Finrod and Andreth. It brings this discussion and this question of, what do elves and men learn by loving one another and respecting one another, hearing each other's stories and considering their perspectives. The perspective of those who are immortal and yet bound to a world that is fading, and mortal and bound to leave it. So how do they look at each other? Now, the setting is the Wars of Beleriand, where the elves and men are first meeting, getting to know each other as entirely different races, like peoples, and they're fighting against Morgoth. The two characters are Finrod Felagund, who is the wisest of elven kings and leaders, and Andreth, who is one of the wisest of mortals, of men. And she is, by this point, it seems like she's old. It seems like they're having this conversation because she, when she was young, loved the younger brother of Finrod. And this is one of those tense moments, like, how can an immortal elf love a mortal man? And so there's kind of this romantic backstory to Andreth, and she is grieving this. I think by now she could be older, she could be an old woman, but her love interest is still young in elven terms. So that possible dynamic is depicted here, but in this beautiful artwork. In the dialogue, Andreth, says to Finrod, it is not true that we were just meant to die. Nay, Lord, the wise among men say, we were not made for death, nor born ever to die. Death was imposed on us. And behold, the fear of it is with us always, and we flee from it forever, as the hart from the hunter. But for myself, I deem that we cannot escape within this world. Nay, not even if we could come to the light beyond the sea, or that Aman of which ye tell. And that's actually true, because when mortal people go west to Valinor, they actually they die more quickly, because it's not the land that makes people immortal. It's the people, the Valar and the elves, that make the land immortal. There's more intensity there, and it actually would make humans burn out more quickly. Now, it is true that Frodo went there to be healed, and that did happen, but he basically he died there. It was the mercy of Valinor that he could go there and feel relief from the pain of having borne the ring and having been stabbed by the Nazgul and all these things. So Andreth is right. Even if we could sail to the light beyond the sea, we wouldn't escape death. It might come for us faster. And she's saying this with a sense of grief and anger. And she is saying to Finrod, you don't understand what it's like to be us. So Finrod responds with this: it may be true that we don't understand you, but you don't understand what it's like to be an elf either. And says, now, none of us know, though the Valar may know the future of Arda, or how long it is ordained to endure, but it will not endure forever. It was made by Eru, but he is not in it. The one only has no limits. You see us, the Quendi, still in the first ages of our being, and the end is far off. But the end will come, that we all know. And then we must die. We must perish utterly, it seems, for we belong to Arda. Our hunter is slow-footed, but he never loses the trail. He's responding to what Andreth said, that death hunts men quickly. And Finrod says, well, our hunter is slow-footed, but he never loses the trail, and no one speaks to us of hope. So Finrod and the elves have looked at mortal men with a sense of wonder, like, apparently you get to escape the world, but to where? We don't know, but we assumed that because it was the gift of Iluvatar, that you had hope in it, that there was something good that was going to be accomplished. But now what Andreth tells Finrod disturbs him. Like, well, if it's not a gift, then who made you mortal? Was it Melkor? Was it the Morgoth? And this picture shows Morgoth, first coming into Arda. Here he is towering, above everything, like a mountain waiting in the waters, crowned with fire. Was it Morgoth? Well, then this is a matter of dread, said Finrod. We know Melkor, the Morgoth, and know him to be mighty. Yea, I have seen him, and I have heard his voice, and I have stood blind in the night that is at the heart of his shadow, whereof you, Andreth, know not save by hearsay and the memory of your people. But never even in the night have we believed that he could prevail against the children of Eru. This one he might cozen, or that one he might corrupt. But to change the doom of a whole people of the children, to rob them of their inheritance? If he could do that in Eru's despite, then greater and more terrible is he by far than we guessed. Then all the valor of the Noldor is but presumption and folly. Nay, Valinor and the mountains of the Pelori are builded on sand. You see why this is a debate between Finrod and Andreth. As much as these two people care for one another, they really are debating, like, well, what does immortality and mortality mean? And now we're getting at root causes. Well, why do you die then? If you weren't meant to die, but you are dying, then who did this to you? And Finrod says, well, it can't be Melkor, because there's no way that he could do this to an entire race, to all of the humans, because you're children of Eru. How could Eru allow this? And so Finrod says, well, it must be Eru. Eru Iluvatar must have willed that you die and be mortal, and so it must be that you did something wrong. So Finrod says, to doom the deathless to death, from father to son, and yet to leave to them the memory of an inheritance taken away, and the desire for what is lost? Could the Morgoth do this? No, I say. And for that reason, I said that if your tale is true, then all in Arda is vain, from the pinnacle of Oyolase to the uttermost abyss. For I do not believe your tale. None could have done this, save the one. Therefore, I say to you, Andreth, what did ye do, ye men, long ago in the dark? How did ye anger Eru? For otherwise all your tales are but dark dreams devised in a dark mind. Will you say what you know or have heard? Andreth replies, no, and we don't know. I will not, said Andreth. We do not speak of this to those of other race. But indeed the wise are uncertain and speak with contrary voices. For whatever happened long ago, we have fled from it. We have tried to forget, and so long have we tried that now we cannot remember any time when we were not as we are, save only legends of days when death came less swiftly and our span was still far longer. But already there was death. Andreth says, but, I didn't consider your point of view. This lore takes no account of you, said Andreth, for we knew nothing of the Eldar or their experience. We considered only dying and not dying, of life as long as the world, but no longer we had not heard. Indeed, not until now has it entered my mind. One way to appreciate what Andreth is doing here is shifting a little bit into our reality and saying, well, if nuclear war was certain and the earth was going to be destroyed and human beings would die, or if the sun becomes a black hole swallowing the earth, or if the universe burning down to coldness and death is going to happen sooner or later, then what is the point then of living for a really long time? Does it matter whether you live a short while or a long while? Well, I guess not. Right. And that's where Andreth feels challenged at this point. So then in the debate and the discussion, they move to consider what is happening with our bodies and souls. So because the elves believe and teach others that the union between body and soul is the result of a creator who loves us, that it is natural for the body and soul to be together. It is unnatural for them to be separated by death. So Andreth considers this and says, well, I hold then that it is not to be thought that the severance of these two could be according to the true nature of men. For were it natural for the body to be abandoned and die, but natural for the Fea, or the soul, to live on, then there would indeed be a disharmony in man, and his parts would not be united by love. Like it would be a force fit or a temporary thing, and that would be strange to say. If it is more natural for the soul to be separated from the body, that is strange. Then what's the point? Why stick around? Why not do that sooner? And furthermore, what do I do with the things that I'm learning from you, Finrod, of there is a harmony between the body and the soul that increases the problem. The separation of body and soul at death cannot be a permanent state if there is a creator God who loves us. This is really important, and it's kind of a philosophical move on Tolkien's part to have elves represent a union of body and soul that is natural and that lasts for as long as the world lasts, because now that limits the other option, which is, well, maybe it's actually good for souls to be disembodied, to leave the body and to float around in heaven, and then to kind of leave the created world or the physical world behind and go somewhere else. So, why not that? That is what has been called the Gnostic or the Platonic or Neoplatonic option. Elves in the story in Tolkien's Legendarium are in the story to basically cut that off, because the more Andreth and Finrod consider each other, and the more elves and men consider each other and piece together what they know, they have to come to a conclusion that honors both body and the soul, honors both Arda and whatever there is to come next. And so that's what happens to Finrod as he pieces together parts of Andreth's lore. He says, but this is strange to me, and even as did your heart when I spoke of your unrest, so now mine leaps up as at the hearing of good news. That's really interesting, right? The phrase good news is euangelion in Greek, and or it would be euangelion in Greek, and that is the word for gospel. This then, I propound, was the errand of men, not the followers, but the heirs and fulfillers of all, to heal the marring of Arda, already foreshadowed before their devising. So you must be important to undo the marring, to heal it, and to do more as agents of the magnificence of Eru, to enlarge the music and surpass the vision of the world. For that Arda healed shall not be Arda unmarred, but a third thing, and a greater, and yet the same. I have conversed with the Valar who were present at the making of the music, ere the being of the world began. And now I wonder, did they hear the end of the music? Meaning, is there more? There's something about your being here, of humans being here, that makes me believe that there is more to the music of Eru Ilúvatar that is to come, and that this means that there will be an Arda healed. So there are questions in Finrod's mind that are being somewhat answered. There's hints being dropped as they have this conversation. Andreth asks, what then would you say is the supreme moment that Eru has reserved? Like, what is it that's to come? Ah, wise lady, said Finrod, I am an Elda, and again I was thinking of my own people. But nay, of all the children of Eru, I was thinking that by the second children we might have been delivered from death. Forever, as we spoke of death being a division of the united, I thought in my heart of a death that is not so, but the ending together of both. For that is what lies before us, so far as our reason could see, the completion of Arda and its end, and therefore also of us, children of Arda, the end, when all the long lives of the elves shall be wholly in the past. And then suddenly I beheld, as a vision, Arda remade, and there the Eldar completed, but not ended, could abide in the present forever, and there walk maybe with the children of men, their deliverers, and sing to them such songs as even in the bliss beyond bliss should make the green valleys ring and the everlasting mountaintops to throb like harps. This is what is opening up in Finrod's mind and heart and spirit. Like we had kind of hoped that you, the second children of Eru, would be our deliverers in some way, and we continue to hope that. So yes, even though you do die, we don't think that's the end for you, and that gives us hope that the ending of Arda will not be the end for us. And then there's this really great discussion when Finrod asks Andreth about hope, and he says that in the Elven tongues there's two types of hope. There's Amdir and Estel, and the difference is that Amdir means looking up at what you can see and kind of stretching out for it. Estel goes beyond that. It means trust, and specifically trust in Eru. So even when things are not looking up, even when you can't be optimistic about your circumstances, this trust is not defeated by the ways of the world, for it does not come from experience, but from our nature and first being. So that's really important because, of course, experience contains disappointment. And if you're including all of your disappointment along with all of your victories, you wouldn't be sure about which way to go. You know, is there hope in a capital H type of way? So Estel for the elves is it's trust in Eru based on our nature as elves and our first being, which was a sense of wonder, a sense of love for the beauty of this world. And he says, we believe that Eru does not plant to no purpose. So if he planted Arda, and if he planted us in it and planted our joy and love for this, the beauty in this world in us, then there must be more. Andreth then kind of complains. She says, well, men have no basis for Estel because of death. She says, do you not perceive that it is part of our wound that Estel should falter and its foundations be shaken? Are we the children of the one? Are we not cast off finally? Or were we ever so? So because we're mortal and because we leave the world, are we truly children of Eru like you are? Aren't we cast off? Aren't we abandoned? Is not Melkor the nameless, the Lord of the world? Who is the one whom ye called Eru? If we put aside the men who serve the nameless, as do many in Middle Earth, meaning, okay, there are not elves who serve Morgoth, but there are men who serve Morgoth. If you just kind of average out the men who serve Morgoth and the men who serve the elves, who are on the side of the elves, the Valar and Eru, so you would reach kind of like a big question mark. And Andreth is saying, even if you put aside the men who serve Morgoth, still many men perceive the world only as a war between light and dark, equipotent, meaning if good and evil are basically equal and opposite each other in power, then this is going to go on forever. There is no Arda remade. There will be no victory of good over evil. There's no happy ending story. There's just kind of a never-ending story that becomes really boring. And this is where the elves in Tolkien's story, and maybe more, maybe like fairy or myth in a more general sense, might serve the purpose of preparing people for a fuller disclosure of a good triumph over evil story and how that would work, as an Israel did. And it is not to say that they are parallel or that they are equivalent, or that we can simply do away with the experience of biblical Israel and the documentation that we call the Hebrew Scriptures or the Old Testament. No way. But there is a lesser version, like, or it's in a minor key, or it is somehow less clear, but perhaps pointing in the same direction. And I think what Tolkien does here is paint that picture. Andreth incorporates elven lore and what the elves are telling her. And again, it is not as clear as what Israel tells us about the nature of good and evil, but it is pointing in the same direction. So Andreth says, but you will say, nay, that is Manwë and Melkor. Eru is above them. Is then Eru only the greatest of the Valar, a great god among gods, as most men will say, even among the Etani, a king who dwells far from his kingdom and leaves lesser princes to do here much as they will? Again, you say, nay, Eru is one, alone without peer, and he made Ea and is beyond it, and the Valar are greater than we, but yet no nearer to his majesty. Is this not so? Yes, said Finrod, we say this, and the Valar we know, and they say the same, all save one. That is Melkor, right? But which think you is more likely to lie? Those who make themselves humble, or he that exalts himself? Ooh, consider the source. Consider the character of the one who is giving that information. What the elven lore is saying is, look, we are connected to the Valar, and this is what we know from them. Eru is the one above all, and he is good. His purposes are good, and Melkor is not equipotent with Eru. So Andreth is able to hold on to that, to receive that, and to say, okay. So they get a little bit more into the question of hope, and Andreth shares, oh yes, there is a small group of men who call themselves of the old hope. Those of the old hope, said Finrod, who are they? A few, she said, but their number has grown since we came to this land, and they see that the nameless can, as they think, be defied. meaning we can fight Morgoth. Yet that is no good reason. To defy him does not undo his work of old. And if the valor of the Eldar fails here, then their despair will be deeper. For it was not on the might of men or of any of the peoples of Arda that the old hope was grounded. What then was this hope, if you know? Finrod asked. They say, answered Andreth, they say that the One will himself enter into Arda and heal men and all the marring from the beginning to the end. This they say also, or they feign, is a rumor that has come down through years uncounted, even from the days of our undoing. Oh, meaning like from the time that we can remember, which is we were always mortal, there is this hope, there's this saying, and it's not substantiated by anything that we know, meaning, look, even if we can fight Morgoth and even if we defeat him, that doesn't necessarily mean that Eru the One will himself enter into Arda. Like that by itself is just so radical that there's nothing that we know of that provides a basis for believing that. We just know it's been said. Now, Finrod contemplates this. What would be the implication of that? Finrod says, if Eru wished to do this, I do not doubt that he would find a way, though I cannot foresee it. For as it seems to me, even if he in himself were to enter in, he must still remain also as he is, the author without. Well, so let's just pause right there. That he's extrapolating what this claim would mean. He doesn't doubt that Eru would be able to do it, but it would mean that Eru would be able to be simultaneously within the creation and outside of it. So because the creation would not be able to contain Eru. That is amazing. That leads to, at the very least, a binatarian understanding of Eru, right? Eru immanent and Eru transcendent. And I would say a trinitarian understanding of Eru, because there must be also a link between them. Whew. Okay, we'll come back to that. And yet, Andreth, to speak with humility, I cannot conceive how else this healing could be achieved. Since Eru will surely not suffer Melkor to turn the world to his own will and to triumph in the end. Yet there is no power conceivable greater than Melkor, save Eru only. So all the Valar combined, they're not able to undo all of the evil and mischief and the corruption that Melkor has seeded into Arda. Remember, in this story, it's not just that Melkor needs to be personally defeated. It's that Melkor has invested his power into the substance, the matter of Arda. He has also created corrupted beings, or rather, he has corrupted created beings. He can't create things by himself, so he can only corrupt. He can be defeated personally, but that doesn't necessarily mean that all things will be set right, all things will be healed. And so if Eru wants to undo all that, he has to come with the ability to give life. Therefore, Eru, if he will not relinquish his work to Melkor, who must else proceed to mastery, then Eru must come in to conquer him. More, even if Melkor, or the Morgoth that he has become, could in any way be thrown down or thrust from Arda, still his shadow would remain, and the evil that he has wrought and sown as a seed would wax and multiply. And so, obviously, Sauron would be counted as among that, but so would Smaug, so would other dragons, Scatha the worm, so would Balrog, so would the damage that's been done to Arda. And if any remedy for this is to be found, and especially orcs, right? If orcs could be redeemed, which is a big question, because apparently they're either corrupted elves or men or both or some other thing, that would need to be reversed or undone. How could this be done? And if any remedy for this is to be found, ere all is ended, any new light to oppose the shadow, or any medicine for the wounds, then it must, I deem, come from without. Finrod and the elves know that the beauty and the majesty of Arda, while wonderful, is also declining. They also know that the powers of the Valar are also declining, right? Yavanna was able to bring forth the two trees once and once only, and after that it can't be duplicated, right? The first investments of power just can't be reproduced. Everything is in decline. You can call it like the second law of thermodynamics, as opposed to life, as opposed to the powers, the magic of the beings of Middle Earth and Arda. And so Finrod and Andreth part ways, and Finrod believes. So they come back to a personal conversation, and Andreth asks about Finrod's brother, and how is he doing in the battle? Will he be there, bright and tall, and the wind in his hair? Tell him not to be reckless, not to seek danger beyond need. I will tell him, said Finrod, but I might as well tell thee not to weep. He is a warrior, Andreth, and a spirit of wrath. In every stroke that he deals, he sees the enemy who long ago did thee this hurt. But you are not for Arda. Whither you go, may you find light. Await us there, my brother and me. Oh, that ending is so powerful. As Finrod parts from Andreth, he recognizes, but you are not for Arda. Like, you are meant for more than this world. Even though Finrod doesn't know ultimately where Andreth, where her soul, where her Fea will go, he says, may you find light. And when you do, wait for us there, the elves, my brother and me. He includes himself in that. That is so touching. That is the example of what elves and the humans are supposed to learn from each other. So let's think about what we've learned from that dialogue. There are narrative requirements for Eru's victory, meaning there must be something about human mortality that must be true. So it cannot have been plan A. Whatever did happen, it couldn't have been Eru's original will for human beings to simply die, for them to simply be mortal. But if it's plan B, then it cannot be the end goal. And so human mortality has to be explained and overcome. Finrod and Andreth have not done that, right? So the story, the debate stopped short. It has not yet been fully explained. It's been clarified, but it's not been explained. Why? Why are humans mortal? Why do we pass out of this world? Why can't we stay? And why can't we live as long as the elves? Because we love you. We want to continue in relationship, in your presence, and this has to be overcome. Now, there is a side question that is not directly addressed, but it is implied throughout, which is, well, why don't we all just become disembodied souls? And again, that would be in the Platonic and Neoplatonic tradition. And in the story, it is because the elves are still embodied and are bound to Arda, meaning this does not resolve the question of love. If elves and men love one another and desire relationship forever, to continue and to continue to deepen, then one side of that friendship, one side of that love is anchored in embodiment. So disembodiment is not going to resolve that. What the elves are saying are bodies are an intrinsic part of our personhood. It's not just that we can say our personhood is about the soul. No, bodies are included. The other narrative requirements for Eru's victory touch both Eru and then Melkor. Eru must be 100% good and original and able to defeat evil without becoming evil. That much we know for certain. And Melkor must be created, finite, and misguided. Now, is this pointing to Christian hope? I think so. Here is the Christian understanding of why are humans mortal and what can be done about that. So this is Irenaeus of Lyon in Against Heresies. Again, he was the early 2nd century Christian writer. He's probably the most important writer of this Christian writer of the 2nd century. He was mentored out of Asia Minor and the Christian communities that were developing there, which has received the most investment from the apostles, like the first generation of Christian leaders. And so Irenaeus is Bishop of Lyon, and he explains human mortality like this. Wherefore also God drove him, Adam, out of paradise. So there's the reason God drove Adam and Eve and humanity out of paradise and removed him far from the tree of life. Not because he envied him the tree of life, as some venture to assert, but because he pitied him, meaning it was out of love. Notice pity, the character quality that is so huge to Gandalf, because it was huge to Nienna, who was able to weep over the 2 trees of Valinor and bring forth the sun and the moon. It is so huge to the story of Tolkien's Legendarium. Pity. God pitied him and did not desire that he should continue a sinner forever, nor that the sin which surrounded him should be immortal, and evil, interminable, and irremediable. Oh, those are big words. But he set a bound to his state of sin by interposing death, and thus causing sin to cease, putting an end to it by the dissolution of the flesh, which should take place in the earth, so that man, ceasing at length to live to sin and dying to it, might begin to live to God. Irenaeus is saying, look, from God's point of view, he had to stop Adam and Eve and their descendants from eating from the tree of life while they were in a corrupted state. Anything was better than that, because if we were able to eat from the tree of life while being corrupted, we would make our sin immortal. We would make human evil and injustice immortal. It would be interminable and unhealable. So mortality is better than that. So God said, look, I have to make you leave. You can't stay here. And yes, you will be mortal now, but I will solve that issue by sending Jesus. He will share in your broken humanity that you might share in his healed humanity. That's coming. Look in hope. Death is not the end. And it's even an expression of God's pity. Yes, it's a severe mercy, as many have said, but it is still a mercy. In terms of some of the biblical sources of that, Adam and Eve forced God to close access to the Garden of Eden out of God's love, not God's retributive justice. In other words, it wasn't as if Adam and Eve made God mad, and so God said, I'm going to make you suffer because you made me mad. That would be retributive justice. It's not that. It is pity. And it's an aspect of God's restorative justice. God was aiming to restore human nature. And so, yes, Paul, the Apostle Paul in 1 Corinthians 15, verse 26 says, death is the last enemy. That is true. But death is not the first enemy. The first enemy is the corruption of sin, and death serves one constructive and healing purpose, and that is to bury it in the ground, causing, as Irenaeus says, causing sin to cease, putting an end to it by the dissolution of the flesh, which should take place in the earth. The question then becomes, how will God heal the corruption of sin in human nature? Well, here is Irenaeus in a different part of Against Heresies. He says, this is why Jesus shared in our broken humanity, that we might share in his healed humanity. Let me read this quote. For unless man had overcome the enemy of man, the enemy would not have been legitimately vanquished. But the law coming, which was given by Moses, laid a weighty burden upon man who had sin in himself, showing that he was liable to death. Meaning, God chose Israel to be kind of like a medical focus group and said, I need you to get as healed as possible. I know you won't be able to take it all in, but this is a demanding health regimen. I'm giving it to you so that you could taste enough health that you would long for the cure, because the rest of humanity, you are an uncooperative patient population, right? And when you have that, then how do you help people get healed? Because healing in this sense always needs human partnership. If you're God, and even a doctor and patient today need a partnership. God is a doctor, we are the patient population. We need to be cooperative enough even to understand, to diagnose the disease, to understand the symptoms, and then to hope for the cure, even to document the diagnosis, which is the Old Testament. So it laid the law or the Torah or the demanding health regimen laid a weighty burden upon Israel, because they also had sin in themselves. They were participating in the problem, and they were liable to death too. But why did God do that? Because Jesus would be born from Israel. For it behooved him who was to destroy sin and redeem man under the power of death, that he should himself be made that very same thing which he was, that is, man, who had been drawn by sin into bondage, but was held by death, so that sin should be destroyed by man, and man should go forth from death. Jesus inherited the vocation of Israel. Jesus said, I understand my people's origin story, that there were flaws from the very beginning of that, but I will receive the medicine. I will receive the demanding health regimen. I will receive it and press it so deeply into my human nature that I will destroy the thing that's been destroying humanity. And at his crucifixion, he killed the thing that's been killing us. In his resurrection, he emerged with a new, healed humanity. And so Irenaeus says, God recapitulated in himself the ancient formation of man. In other words, he retold the human story, that he might kill sin, deprive death of its power, and vivify man, and therefore his works are true. So Jesus was the hero that inherited the conditions set by the tragic hero. He lived under them, and he retold the story, retold it as the faithful one, where everyone else, all the tragic heroes, had failed. They made mistakes. They gave in to the temptations. They resisted the treatment. They gave in to the disease. They let the disease continue. Jesus said, no, I will not do that. I will be 100% faithful. And thus he killed sin, deprived death of its power, and gave life to human nature. A few comments from Paul in 1 Corinthians 15:17. He says, if Christ has not been raised, your faith is futile, and you are still in your sins. Notice, he says, if Christ has not been raised, resurrected. So it's not just Jesus's death that sets us free from our sins. It's his resurrection as well. Why? Because if human nature is corrupted, then there needs to be a human nature that has been cleansed of the corruption. We need the antibodies in someone's body, and that is Jesus. In Romans 6:6, Paul says, we know that our old self was crucified with him so that the body of sin might be destroyed, so we might no longer be enslaved to sin. Paul there is speaking about the Christian sacrament of baptism. When we die and rise by going under the water and coming up out of the water, we are identified with Jesus's own baptism and death and resurrection. And there, Jesus destroyed the body of sin that he had, so that in his resurrection, he would come back with a healed humanity. In Romans 8:3, Paul says, for God has done what the law, or the Sinai covenant, weakened by the flesh of Israel, could not do. by sending his own son in the likeness of sinful flesh, meaning in the mature form or mode of sinful flesh. And to deal with sin, he condemns sin in the flesh. How? By Jesus's faithfulness, by his 100% faithful life to the Father. How did God condemn sin? By Jesus never sinning. And so Jesus shared in our broken humanity, our fallen humanity, that we might share in his healed humanity. One of the amazing things about Finrod and Andreth's debate is that Finrod understands what the metaphysical requirements would be for Eru to be victorious. First of all, again, Melkor must be created, finite, and misguided. He can't be co-equal with God. And Eru must be 100% good and original and able to give more life. So Eru, he says, Eru is one, alone without peer, and he made Ea and is beyond it. So in order for this to matter, Eru must be able to defeat evil without becoming evil, and then he must be able to heal and remake Arda. Also, Eru must be able to both enter Arda and remain outside it. So he says, even if he and himself were to enter in, he must still remain also as he is, the author without or outside. And yet, Andreth, to speak with humility, I cannot conceive how else this healing could be achieved, because with Eru is the flame imperishable. It's the secret fire. Only with him. And so if Eru is able to and is willing to come in and heal all of the destruction that Melkor has wrought, not just subdue him personally, but to undo all the damage he's done, then Eru must come in to conquer him. Meaning Eru must have a kind of structure internal to himself by which he can be inside the creation, outside the creation, and linked in oneness. That is a Trinitarian structure. Now we get into epistemology. How do we know if this is the right kind of frame of virtue ethics? How do we know to pursue the faith, hope, and love that Jesus calls us into, that the Christian story calls us into? Well, let's look at that. So how do we know? Well, we looked at narrative requirements, right? We live in a story, and if this story makes sense, then there must be narrative requirements for God's victory in Jesus. You know how people, like pick apart plot holes of movies, and they ask, does this make sense? Is this consistent with that? Well, we could do the same, and the basic elements of the narrative requirements for this to make sense are there. Human mortality. It was not plan A. It never was plan A. At best, it's a plan B on the way to undoing the corruption of sin. And so, yes, both are explained and conquered. The deeper issue, the suffering behind the suffering, the reason why we're mortal in the first place is human evil, that we've corrupted something in ourselves. But there are certain narrative requirements for that as well. It is not from God. If it were from God, we'd have a huge problem, because that means that God is mischievous, does not intend the best for us, is willing to handicap us right from the beginning, and that he's the source of human evil. And if he's the source of human evil, well, then he's both good and evil, and we're stuck. We're stuck with good and evil forever. It really matters to say human evil is not from God. Humans misdirected our growth and disordered love. Why is that possible? Well, human growth is logically required because God is infinite love. To be a finite being called into experience and participate with an infinite being of love means that our growth is required. And because it's love, our free choices are important. And so disordered love is possible. It's not required. It certainly wasn't forced on us, but it's possible because everything God creates is good. So because you and I are good, it's possible to love myself or to love others in the wrong way and in the wrong order, to put God second, third, or last. But God always calls us to repair and restore what we have broken. Those are the narrative requirements for God's victory in Jesus. There's also narrative requirements for the relationship between God and humanity, and those are fulfilled. God entered specifically into human nature. God healed it as one of us to become one with us, meaning he heals it first as Jesus. Jesus presses the Spirit, his Spirit, the Spirit of God, the link between himself and the Father, into every nook and cranny of his humanity. And he's able to give his Spirit to us after his death and resurrection when he has completed his task. And so God himself didn't just enter into the creation, he did it as one of us, and he restored and resumed the human vocation of union and partnership with him. God never violated that principle because it's a principle anchored in his great love for us. And then the metaphysical requirements for God's victory in Jesus are also satisfied by the Christian explanation of who God is. God is able to enter and heal his creation as one of us because he has an internal structure that enables him to do so. He can be inside the creation as the Son, as he remains outside the creation as the Father, and still linked in oneness as the Spirit. So that link of the Spirit is the Spirit of the Son and the Father. If you read John 14 through 17, especially, you can see how the Spirit is talked about as the Spirit that joins the Father and the Son, and then reaches into us to join us, to unite us with the Father and the Son in partnership. The evidence for the truth of the Christian story is also in us. We have a human desire to see Arda healed, meaning earth healed. We don't just want a personal individual escape. We want a broader, wider, deeper, more profound healing for the whole human race, for all of creation, because we have learned to love the creation too. We don't just want to leave it behind. So faith is a trust. It is an act of trust that God is redeeming these things and that there is a greater music still that God is bringing about because he's always wanted apprenticed musicians. And as we read Lord of the Rings, notice that there are hints of that music. There are hints that the characters hear that music. In the Silmarillion, that music is associated with water. And then in The Return of the King, Gimli and the Hobbits hear the water. And the suggestion is that because of the point in time that they hear the water, that they perceive a music. So in the Silmarillion, it said by the Eldar that in water there lives yet the echo of the music of the Ainur, more than in any substance else that is in this earth. And many of the children of Iluvatar hearken still unsated to the voices of the sea, and yet know not for what they listen. In the story of the Return of the King, as certain important moments happen, water appears, and there is the suggestion of music. So when Gimli follows Aragorn and Legolas into the cave of the dead men of Dunharrow, and Aragorn says, I come to claim your allegiance. You can fulfill your oath, the oath that you betrayed. I now call you, I summon you to fulfill it. You can retell your story. And when they agree and they go to meet Aragorn to renew that oath, you hear this tinkle of water. Suddenly, Gimli heard the tinkle of water, a sound hard and clear as a stone falling into a dream of dark shadow. Light grew. Tolkien has such a way with words, but there is a musical sound of water hitting stone. It makes us think of the music of Eru Iluvatar. Somehow the music is being resumed. The music, the right music that these men had introduced dissonance into, now there is resolution. And then at the end, when Frodo sails into the west at the Grey Havens, Sam, Merry, and Pippin stand watching as the light of Eärendil vanished into Valinor once again. There still Sam stood far into the night, hearing only the sigh and murmur of the waves on the shore of Middle-earth, and the sound of them sank deep into his heart. Beside him stood Merry and Pippin, and they were silent. The only sound are the waves lapping, the sigh and the murmur, the music that sinks deep into their hearts. This is the music that can grow, the music that echoes more and more, that's heard in the waves because they come in a rhythm. Now, as we turn from the story of Lord of the Rings and the world of fairy and myth into the story of the Old Testament and Jesus, we hear not just a story that evokes themes and longings in us, but actual evidence in history. We see signposts. We see specifically the testimony of the Jewish people. And what do they tell us? They tell us about the creation, about how it is good. It is not a deception. It is not the creation of a malicious God. It is good because a good God made it all. Also, our bodies are good. There is a vision that this God has of relationship, of shalom, of a garden spreading over the wild creation because of human partnership with God. This is the testimony of the Jewish people. We hear about the patterns of God speaking and then fulfilling. That sounds musical, of God saying, let there be light, and then there is, of God saying, Abraham and Sarah, I will bring forth a child in you despite your old age. And then it happens. When God speaks and then fulfills, it lays a groundwork, a basis for God's trustworthiness. And then there are signposts of God's faithfulness like that all throughout Israel's history, so that when God says, I will heal your disease, the corruption of sin, the sin sickness in you, by coming myself, there is a groundwork laid to believe that God can do that. It is like the testimony of the elves about the goodness of the body and about the goodness of Arda, because fairy in Tolkien's mind is really about mortality and God. Those are the two concerns that Tolkien perceived about fairy stories. And ultimately, we have to reckon with the experience of Jesus of bodily resurrection. So number one, Jesus was a real historical man from Nazareth who grew up in Israel, and he lived, died, and rose again. And this is the ultimate signpost of God's present love and also future victory. Jesus's resurrection indicates that God wants to heal every single person with their partnership, and also that God will have a future victory where good will triumph over evil. And we will resume an adventure, a journey of growth, of goodness, of gardening, of life and love that never depended on death, evil, selfishness, and sin to be there. We did have to overcome it, but we will resume a path of growth with God. Finite beings getting to know an infinite being of love, a God who loves us so much he became one of us in order to become one with us, all the while being wholly other than us. He is the Son, the Spirit, and the Father. And so I find myself captivated by the story and the music that it points to, how a good God will triumph over evil. And the Christian story, the story of Jesus, fills full the story of the Lord of the Rings. Why? Because the same music that was in the Silmarillion in the beginning is the music that is playing out in our story in real time. Let me read again how the music of Eru Iluvatar captures and overtakes and resolves the dissonance of Melkor's music. The one was deep and wide and beautiful, but slow and blended with an immeasurable sorrow, from which its beauty chiefly came. The other had now achieved a unity of its own, but it was loud and vain and endlessly repeated, and it had little harmony. but rather a clamorous unison as of many trumpets braying upon a few notes. And it essayed to drown the other music by the violence of its voice, but it seemed that its most triumphant notes were taken by the other and woven into its own solemn pattern. And as we look forward to a greater music, as we long for a greater and deeper melody, do we not hope for this, the great hope that Eru will himself enter into Arda and heal men and all the marring? It is what Irenaeus of Lyon said of Jesus, an unlooked for thing which could have been accomplished in no other way than by God, the Lord of all, an unlooked for salvation. Friends, I hope you have enjoyed these videos. If you have used them for discussion and reflection, I hope that it has been rewarding to do so. I hope that this helps you enjoy Tolkien as you read his works and dive into them. And most importantly, I hope that this helps you understand the beauty and appreciate and see the beauty in the Christian story, in the story of Jesus, and how you are invited to participate in it. I hope you enjoy more videos here at this channel. Thanks for tuning in.